there were two strangers, not just one, at the well that day. Two. The woman was as much a stranger to Jesus as Jesus was a stranger to her. And there they had this chance encounter, something which Jesus could not have anticipated, and certainly something that the woman never expected. But there they were. They were strangers. That was the one thing they had in common. Other than that, there were so many differences between them. He was a man, she was a woman. He was a Jew, she was a Samaritan. He had a good reputation. She had no reputation, or a bad one. And yet, because they both needed something, there was a reason for them to come together. And something happened as a result. Jesus needed water, and so he asked for a drink. He jumped across the barriers that culture had created, separating Jews from Samaritans, men from women. And he asked because he had a need. Give me a drink. The woman didn't know that she had need, but she discovered it very quickly when Jesus offered her living water that would flow through her and renew her and revitalize her and enable her to be restored to the rest of the human community. And so there at the well, at Jacob's well, that ancient well that had been there now for well over 1,000 years, Jesus and the woman from Samaria had a chance to experience a true miracle from God. They were strangers when they started out. But as a result of this encounter, they were both changed. I can't help but think as I reflect on this story of how much of our lives we spend in the company of strangers. Think about it. So many different places where we find ourselves, we're a stranger and they are strangers to us. For example, you go to a baseball game or a football game and there's all kinds of people around, but they're all strangers. Or you go to Penn Station. I go into the city once a month for a meeting, and I'm amazed at how many people there are that manage to rush through there at high speed and not run into each other. That's a miracle in itself. But they're all strangers. There are so many places like that. You go to a supermarket, go to Kohl's, shopping, and there, it's all strangers. Very rarely do you see a face that you recognize and someone that you know. But then again, so much of our lives, even on the smaller scale that we sometimes live, so much of our experiences with strangers. For example, you go to work, or you go to school, and there are people there that you see perhaps every day. The chances are you don't know too much about them, and they don't know much about you. And chances are you haven't shared a great deal with them. You're strangers, really. Or you come to a place like this. You come into the church to worship. You hear about loving one another and loving your neighbor and all that stuff. And yet the fact of the matter is that when it comes right down to it, we hardly know one another. We hardly understand one another's needs and problems and concerns. And it's very hard for us to continue to show some kind of interest in one another beyond just the ordinary conversation that one might have. We're a company of strangers, and it comes right down to it. And there's a certain sadness about that. And yet we know from this story that when strangers are able to meet one another, sometimes miracles take place. When strangers are able to share with one another, sometimes a transformation occurs. Now I realize that we live in the kind of society with all the violence and all the cruelty that people exert on others that it's dangerous sometimes, very risky to make ourselves vulnerable to another person, especially someone that fears that we have acquired over the years. Fears of the stranger, person who is not us. And yet, when we are able to transcend that, when we are able to, by the grace of God and by the love of God, enter into some kind of dialogue with others who may be strangers to us, God is able to work a miracle. God is able to help us to hear what someone else is saying. God is able to convert what we say into words that bring comfort, strength, peace, hope, even joy. Words that change people's lives. I know that we need to be cautious. But caution is not the only thing in life. And there are times when we need to have the same courage that Jesus showed there at the well, when he, in just an ordinary way, opened the door to a stranger that changed things forever for her. What are we afraid of? We don't need to fear strangers. If we're willing to take the risk of reaching out to others, we might discover that they don't remain strangers forever.